you have these entrance exams which basically dictate what subject you will end up taking. But in my case, it was basically 2008 recession when I entered engineering. So there was a lot of like conversation about like how computer science is like, under
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that was not.
Oh, sorry.
It was basically the other side, and people said ki, like it's very safe to like get a mechanical engineering and civil engineering job because construction happens everywhere. So the baseline is that you will get a job, right? Like economics basically make it very difficult for you to get into social sector, right? Like if you're a very good data scientist or like a software engineer, you would want to stay in the industry because like the not-for-profit sector, like philanthropic sector is now much better paid in that sense.
Yeah.
But like earlier it was not a choice. But like, that also basically means because in data kind you were able to see like what kind of like challenges or like innovation that you could do with respect to data, right? Like so that led me to ask the question, which is like the third important question: where do you have domain knowledge? So I as a software engineer sitting inside MNC, which is a global delivery center, you're slightly far away from the problem. Data kind is to harness the power of data science for the service of humanity, right? Yeah. So when I say like data, and I'm talking more from like a practitioner standpoint than anything else, we would talk about like say structured, semi-structured, and unstructured data. These are like the classifications, but fundamentally, data is any piece of like any piece of organized data is information, is what I would say. And that's a very fun part. You get to teach, and you are teaching basically all the other people who are also part of the interview process, right? Like so they would come and they would teach, and you're teaching among like people who have either already gone through the India journey, or like they were probably the ones who started it. And just going back to your education and thinking like one thing that I learned in school, right? Like, and that's joyous, right? Like, so true learning is like absolutely joyous. Basically, Central Square Foundation is a foundation, started by Ashish Dhawan. He's a very famous like private equity investor. We are an education think and do tank. So we basically work with a lot of not-for-profit sector organizations, specifically in education space, trying to identify how can you sort of like improve the quality of education for the underserved, right? Artificial intelligence is basically anything that any machine emitting or mimicking like some sort of an intelligence. That's how so fundamental in artificial intelligence is to first understand what intelligence.
Hi, Saurabh. Thank you so much for agreeing to do this interview with Prolog today.
Not a problem at all. Happy to be here.
So for everybody who's tuning in, Saurabh is a member of the OpenNyai initiative, which we'll talk a lot about in detail towards the later half of the interview. He's also a curator at Agami, which is a social entrepreneurship initiative that's trying to create an ecosystem around justice in India. So, and it's a very interesting journey that Saurabh has sort of tread from being a mechanical engineer to then putting his face full time into policy. And if you look at his LinkedIn headline, it's a very interesting headline because it says data into, and then there are like these two curly brackets, people, product, and what's the third thing I'm kind of forgetting?
Policy.
And policy. So he works on this very interesting intersection where everything sort of ties back into data and how data then in fact ties into all of these three different separate sections, right? So sort of we'll just start at the absolute beginning, right? Like you're a mechanical engineer by education, right? So and I asked this question a lot, was this like an active choice? Did you want to do engineering, or was it the default setting that a lot of Indians sort of just tend to have?
Yeah, so I basically wanted to do engineering. I really liked it. I mean, I was introduced to computers very early in life. I did not own one. So it was a friend's it was a friend's brother who was doing his computer science engineering from, I think, Pune College of Engineering, and then he basically went to IIT Bombay to do his masters, and that's when I like first used a computer, and it like felt really cool. And in 11th and 12th, I had exposure to that subject. I studied in a Kendriya Vidyalaya, so we had informatics practices like as one of our subjects. So I was really fascinated by that subject. I used to get it also, and yeah, like I was very sure that I wanted to do engineering. Uh, Usually, like you have these entrance exams which basically dictate what subject you will end up taking. But in my case, it was basically 2008 recession when I entered engineering. So there was a lot of like conversation about like how computer science is like under
The
threat.
in thing, yeah.
Yeah, no, that was not.
Oh, sorry.
It was basically the other side, and people said ki, like it's very safe to like get a mechanical engineering and civil engineering job because construction happens everywhere. So the baseline is that you will get a job, right? Like do any of that thing. So I had the opportunity to basically take mechanical engineering from a central university in Assam. It's called Tejpur University. It's a beautiful campus. Like we could see Himalayan ice caps from our
Wow.
hostel, right? Like it was just like that
How do
beautiful.
you study in that environment is something I've never understood, right? Like my brothers recently moved to a campus and it's beautiful. I would just look out into the sky and daydream and get nothing done.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it was just a lot of we were a fairly new engineering program. Like I think I was the third batch of that program from Tejpur University. But yeah, like I think people were just genuinely interested in like doing certain things. Like my peer circle was like a range. Like some were like deep into sports, some were deep into music and culture. Some people, and by the way, all of these are like engineers, right? Like you're
Hmm.
typical engineers. But I think it was just because we were Tejpur University is basically a research university. So bachelor's program, especially in engineering, was fairly new. So the
Got it.
culture of like being a university and that to residential research university, I think it just like provided a lot of people, and it was fairly small also. So I basically describe it as like having like a pseudo liberal arts education because your interaction with like cultural
Right.
department would be like very high. Mass communication department would be very high. Sociology department would be very high, and all of that. I think it was just like the good mix there, like
Mhm.
what we enjoyed. But yeah, I think that was inspiring, and that's why we could study.
Great. And then you worked with an MNC as a software engineer, right?
Yeah, so because like the logical extension of being a mechanical engineering in India is to become a software engineer. So I basically had the fortune to work for Sony India Private Software Center Private Limited. I worked there for 3 years. And during that time, like I was enjoying my work, but at the same time, I was doing a lot of volunteering work. Like I used to go to St. Patrick's Church, to teach kids. And meanwhile, because I had like deep interest in like scientific computing and things like that, which is where like my mechanical engineering was also very focused. I basically started volunteering with DataKind. And it's very interesting because there's another organization in like in the ecosystem, Civic Data Lab, and the founder Gaurav Godhwani. Like I and him, we go back like to my volunteering days during DataKind. He used to be the chapter leader there, and that kind of stuff. But like basically, all of this volunteering led me to take this decision of like switching from an MNC to going for my fellowship at Teach for India. Because I knew कि technical skills hai. I had a thesis about that, like the economics basically make it very difficult for you to get into social sector,
Mm.
right? Like if you're a very good data scientist or like a software engineer, you would want to stay in the industry because like the not-for-profit sector, like philanthropic sector is now much better paid in that sense.
Yeah.
But like earlier it was not a choice. But like, that also basically means because in data kind you were able to see like what kind of like challenges or like innovation that you could do with respect to data, right? Like so that led me to ask the question, which is like the third important question: where do you have domain knowledge? So as a software engineer sitting inside MNC, which is a global delivery center, you're slightly far away from the problem.
Got it.
So Teach for India fellow was like that bet for me that I'll go, I'll learn and plus like as a software engineer, you also don't develop like a lot of social skills per se, right? Like to understand like the world around. So I think Teach for India was like that journey for 2 years. One, like it was a journey of personal transformation. Like I think Teach for India fellows, like when they go inside, when they come outside, like there's a lot that has changed. Both because of the peer that you have, because of the nearness to a problem that you have, and all the support system that you have around that. But yeah, I basically use that opportunity to teach. I used to teach in a low-income private school in Pune, Chaitanya English Medium School. And that's where I taught like sixth and seventh maths and science for 2 years. And yeah, that was my journey from like MNC to Teach for India.
Great. So I'm just going to take a step back because you spoke about volunteering and you spoke about data lab, and these are all very new things to me, right? Can you just tell us a little bit about the initiative and how did you start, and also what is your inclination towards teaching, right? So just take it in two parts.
Yeah, so I'll start about with Make a Difference. Make a Difference is basically a volunteer-led not-for-profit
Right.
organization which has a wide presence all over India. So you basically become a mad volunteer. You get to teach in certain verticals. You get to like manage the administration and the organization of volunteers. You get to sort of like do a lot of social media activities. So there are like a lot of these opportunities that you can access. And I think it just like is a good way to both like find people who really care about problems at the same time. Like I think it's just good for the soul. I think you feel really good after like contributing to something. So it was just that. I also realized that like the skills that I have are largely for the business problems, and I think like that's the natural extension also. But there are a lot of problems at the ground level also, grassroots level also, that can potentially get catalyzed, if not anything else, by the use of data. So I was basically looking for opportunities and just searching on the internet, and that's how I learned about DataKind. So DataKind is a international not-for-profit organization which has chapters all across the world. One chapter is in Bangalore. The tagline or like the mission of DataKind is to harness the power of data science for the service of humanity, right? So there are a lot of like volunteering data scientists, software engineers who basically come together. There are partner organizations, and I'm explaining like the accelerator that we have, right? Like the project accelerators and things like that. So we have partnering organizations, which is usually a not-for-profit, which comes up with a problem statement, and then you have like the team of data scientists sort of collaborating on it, building a solution. So in our time, basically Teach for India, then Digital Green, and Janagraha. There were three partner organizations who came, and sort of like we had problem statements and data scientists sort of working to solve for that. They are either like sort of a machine learning or like a artificial intelligence sort of a problem, or like more of an analytics sort of a problem, where what you're trying to do is like understand the problem much better, and in the other one you're trying to predict like what will really happen. So yeah,
Okay.
that's what.
Again, more fundamental questions here, right? Like when you say data, what really do you mean? And maybe if you can help contextualize what you mean by data in
Yeah.
a sense that will make sense for most of our audience, which tends to be more legal centric in nature. So that will be helpful.
Yeah. So when I say like data, and I'm talking more from like a practitioner standpoint than anything else, we would talk about like say structured, semi-structured, and unstructured data. These are like the classifications, but fundamentally, data is any piece of like any piece of organized data is information, is what I would say, right? Like so, if a magazine article is the information, right, everything that makes it up, which is the letters and everything, right, like that's basically the data. Now when you are processing it with machine, you can have structured, unstructured, semi-structured, or unstructured data. So when you see like an Excel sheet, right, when you see an Excel sheet, it's and you have like rows and columns, very well defined sort of a schema of like what is the information that you're storing there. Like that would be an example of structured data. There are say like you're making like a hierarchical list. So like you're saying okay, let's make a list of tea, coffee, brands of tea, coffee, and say soda, right? Like, and then you have like under that like the brand names, right? So this again, like this is this list can be very inconsistent, right? Like you can probably discover more number of T's or less number of T's compared to other ones, right?
Yeah.
So the standardization is not there, but there is some information still there. So that would be an example of semi-structured data. So a lot of like popular file formats like JSON and all, which you would hear, like those are basically used to sort of like store that kind of information. And then unstructured data would be like very disparate set of data. Basically, like thumb rule is if it doesn't fall under either of these, it's basically unstructured data in that sense. So yeah, so like they can be like numbers. You can have text data. Usually, what you would hear a lot of software engineers use this word called string. String is nothing but like just a line of like text information. Now, all of you know that, like,
Wait, so string data is like sentences? Is that what you mean?
Sentences are basically strings. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But yeah, and the underlying like computer, how does it store it? Like, so each alphabet basically has an ASCII code, which is an international standard code, right? So A is 65, B is 66, and things like that. And then you convert like 65 into a binary process, like, and that's what it be stored when you're storing that particular string. So everything has a size. So when you hear like 16 GB, like if you store like a really, really large string, it could basically mean like it could be like 16 GB string, in which case your machine will start like, cracking basically, right? Like, so all of these pieces of information basically have some size. They're either stored in your hard disk or in your memory. But that's the journey from like, at the binary level to like what does a data type mean. So when you say sentence is a string, and this is how it's stored.
Okay. And what are the usual, problems with data sets? Because you said that you basically look at a data and see if it is useful for a problem statement, right? But how do you sort of make that analysis? How do you look at a data and say, oh, this will work, or this might not work, or this is, I don't know, imperfect, or whatever else the terminology is?
No, so you don't start from data.
Okay.
You always start from a problem, right? Like there has to be like an inquiry into the world.
So I'm just going to stop you here. Can you also probably help us understand how do you define a problem? Because I think that is like a tougher challenge than going to look and actually mine data at a later stage.
Yeah. No, sure. So basically, like it basically starts with observation. So you think so? See, like when we talk about artificial intelligence, machine learning, or even software, or those things, right? Like the goal that we are trying to achieve is like automation, right? Like good quality automation, and that would be really helpful because then we are able to multiply what a human being can do in say a given period of time, right? Like you're making it more efficient in that sense. So that's the goal, right? Now, how do you find like areas where you can potentially bring efficiency or quality, right? Like, so for that, you'll have to basically see like what is happening, right? Like where is the human value chain right now is. So if you say go to a court, you go to a registry, now there's a process that you have to follow. There are things that you need to check. When you think about that, there are certain things that you would say, oh my God, like this is like such a simple thing. I just wish like, someone could automate it for me, right? Like, so, okay, bang on. That's the use case for some sort of an automation, right? Or you say ki, oh my God, like I have an intuition, or like maybe this is what is happening. So like you want to study, like, are we being discriminate towards like certain, class of people or certain like category of people in certain kind of decisions or matters, right? Like that is what you want to study. So that's another kind of inquiry that you can have, right? Like, so first you do an observation, which basically leads to an inquiry. And then you basically figure out, okay, if I need to answer this problem, what do we need? So sometimes if you say like, your problems are like, how do I find out the truth, right? Like, so then there are like hypothesis testing methods for that. So like if you want to say, again, using an example, and I read this example, which was very well illustrated in this book called Noise. Yeah, the
Daniel Kahneman.
Yeah, exactly, right? Like, so the first chapter is like, it's very beautifully written, about like the decision making in judiciary and the error margins in the decision, very nicely statistically represented. So that's the kind of stuff that you want to do, right? Like, so then you want to gather the examples of like, when would you say certain things were discriminatory, right? Like you will have to also define like what discriminatory really means, right? Then you will collect some data on that. What will that data schema would look like is a more detailed question that you'll have to ask. because we want to control for randomness and things like that. So there are like very well set like mathematical ways to assess if a sentence is true or not. So that's the kind of one inquiry that you can have with respect to like artificial intelligence or machine learning. What you really try to do is like you are trying to automate through examples. So here you might so this is an example of analytics. Then let's talk about automation. In automation, earlier software engineers used to write specific pieces of logic. If this, then that. Right? Like if the color is red, then stop. Right? Like if the button 3 is pressed, then take me to third floor. Right? Like these are the kind of logics. Right? Like it's very if this, then that sort of a logic. Then you had a little bit of like probabilistic sort of like work also being done. But now what we are saying is like now technology is sophisticated enough where you can chuck the rules, not really do if this, then that, and that allows you to define like really fuzzy and complex problems, right? Like which you can just teach by examples. So yeah, so for example,
Like
right,
more improved decision making is what you're saying, right?
no, decision making which was earlier not possible by just using machines.
Yeah.
So accountants are a classic example, right? Like you could reduce human errors like significantly just by having like calculations done by computers, right? Like where you make ledger entries and things are calculated automatically, right? Like otherwise you would do it like by hand.
Yeah.
This is a capability. This is a new capability that came when you had like computers and everything done, right? But computer was still limited to doing other things that human beings could do. So, for example, let's take an example of waste segregation, right? So on in waste segregation, what you usually have is like a conveyor belt where a lot of like garbage is coming, and what you're trying to do is you're trying to separate like organic waste from metal to some other things, right? Now you cannot conceive a machine which can do it for you, right? Like you can potentially think, okay, my camera to laga sakta hu yahan pe, because it seems like something that you could do with eyes and things like that, right? Like, but it's suddenly very complicated. You can't say if this then that, because a can would not look like a different can which is crushed in a different manner, right? Like, so there's just so much variety. But now, because of artificial intelligence and machine learning, now you have capabilities where camera can be provided with a software where you don't write these explicit rules like if this then that, but you basically say, oh, if you see something like this, okay, put it there. If you see something like this, put there. So this pattern matching is what your artificial intelligence at the core is.
So is it going to be correct to say that one of the like an extension of this use case is what automated vehicles use when they're trying to sort of scan the traffic?
Yeah.
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 All right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So again, like, so let's talk about data in that particular case. In this particular case where you're trying to segregate the waste, you would most likely think about it. Okay, there is an image that I need to take, right? Like in the automated car problem, like there are almost two bets that two companies are taking, right? Like one is the LiDAR technology, right?
Okay, this is getting fairly complicated.
Okay, I'm sorry.
No, please go for it.
Yeah, no, but basically, like, there is a radar technology to scan the environment. You basically need like how different things are placed, right? You can either do it like through, point cloud system, or you can use like just images, right? So a Tesla basically uses camera. Their bet is like we can just improve image processing to a level where you don't need this radar, but radar technology is very, very accurate. So your AI system will be much, much more precise in that sense. So these are like two ways. So like in one case, your data set could look just like numbers. When you get point cloud, it's just numbers, right? Like here you have images, which is again just numbers, like you can convert it. But naturally, like these are the two different kind of data set that you would think about when you're thinking about automation problems.
That's very interesting. I'm going to go back again because you spoke about bias, right? And sort of spoke about whether or not there is discrimination. Now, by using data, you can sort of pinpoint. But how do you ensure that your data isn't biased to begin with, right? Because that's something that is a concern that's very regularly spoken about.
Yeah, I think again, like it starts from the observation. Like if you see that, so everyone when they make like say a system, they need to basically have some way of like testing how accurate it is, right? In our case, like we always start by thinking about how do you make your test data, right? Like so if you so that's the contours of like all the errors that you would want to have, right? Like so when you're saying bias in this decision, let's create a test data key. Okay, if there is no bias, like this is what it would motamoti look like, and then I'll see like how off it is, right? Like that's how you will start doing that thing, and then you have like a lot of like techniques to sort of like balance the data and things like that. But that's just the technical side of things. You have to also think about the other side of things where there might be no data set to start from, right? Like, and then you're basically testing it on you all the population on which you will probably apply this model is not even present in your data, right? Like, say certain, so Dev Data Lab actually did this project where they tried to get whether the judgments are basically biased towards like certain religions or not. And this is what they did, right? Like they scraped the whole eCourts data. 10 years worth of eCourts data is now available in machine readable form thanks to Dev Data Lab. And they basically did this entire research, right? Like, and it's again hypothesis testing, right? Like fundamentally, but like that's just the study side of it. Application side of it, you have to ensure that the problem itself is very well defined. If I basically create a AI model which can predict my CIBIL score, whether I should get a loan or not, just by looking at my face,
Yeah.
that would be a terrible system, right? One, it would not make any economical
Yeah.
sense to have it because it's
Yeah.
gonna be like super inaccurate. But like it's also like this is not how you would measure it, right? Like so you also need to have a sense of like whatever features you're using, how does it like really define the problem in its entirety, and then you have to iterate it. I think there is no AI, all AI systems basically will get stale after some time, so you have to continuously monitor it. You'll have to continuously ensure that biases are dealt with properly, and it's just like an iterative process. What it allows you to do, that iteration is like fair, will be like what you can serve through AI, like the kind of scale of automation that you can provide, the new capabilities you can provide. That's the debate, right? Like whether that outweighs the effort that is required to build AI systems or not. But we are seeing like a steep improvement in that part. So that's the bet of AI.
Got it. And this study that you spoke about, is it in the public domain? Is it
It
easily
is.
accessed? Great. So then I'll take the link and we'll put it in the description
Please
so
do.
people
They
can
have
check.
like a
Yeah.
beautiful paper written on it. Like I think very good example of like what open source work would look like.
Great. Okay. Now we've spoken a lot about data, so I'm going to go back to where we sort of left it, which was TFI, right? A
Yeah.
lot of people are interested in the TFI process and, just what are the kind of things they're looking at. So can you quickly sort of walk us through what the process is and if you have any pointers at all?
No, sure. So like, I joined in 2015, which now is like 7 years back. So I don't know if the process has changed. Most likely not. But essentially, you have our time. I'll talk about like my time. Like when you apply, I think there's a basic form that you have to fill about like showing your interest, why, and all of those inquiries. And then you have to undergo a very simple aptitude test. It's both numerical. And like your language skills and things like that. Then once you clear that, then you would have like one assessment center day. So it's like it's 4 to 5 hours of like continuous like I wouldn't say testing, but like observing you, how are you in that environment. Like so
Got it.
entire Teach for India staff would have like would invite you, you would have interviews, you would have like
Do you have to like sort of teach also a little bit?
yes,
Yeah, yeah.
you do, and that's a very fun part.
Okay.
You get to teach, and you are teaching basically all the other people who are also part of the interview process, right? Like, so they would come and they would teach, and you're teaching among like people who have either already gone through the Teach for India journey,
Yeah.
or like they were probably the ones who started it in the first place, right? Like so yeah, it's a lot of fun. You get to prepare for it. Like you can prepare your own lessons, so like whatever. And I think it's a great reflection of like just going back to your education and thinking like one thing that I learned in school, right? Like, and
Yeah.
that's joyous, right? Like so true learning is like absolutely joyous, and that's what you experience in that day. So yeah, that happens, and then you basically get a application, your like offer letter. It's a 2 year professional sort of a job, right? Like so you get your acceptance letter. In acceptance letter, I think like one very beautiful line was written like
Okay.
if you do not join or something to this effect. I'm not able to remember correctly, but some children may not get the kind of education that you could provide, right? Like, and that was very powerful. So yeah, that happens. Then you basically then you land in Pune Fame University. It's a beautiful campus. That's where you land. That's where you go for a grueling 45 days
Oh, okay.
sort of a training. We try to compress entire B.Ed knowledge in like those
That's
45.
very intense. So like 45 days is nothing.
Yeah, it is nothing, but like I think the idea is also to basically provide you with enough to sort of like learn, right? Like so yeah, like 45 days is also not like sitting in like a cave and
Right.
like just learning how to teach, right? Like, so you have like summer schools. So the school that I taught in for 2 years was summer school for Bombay fellows. So we basically like like got experience working with the children.
Mhm.
And ऐसा भी नहीं है like that you are sent alone for the first time inside
Fair.
the class. Like that would be
Yeah.
terrible, you know.
So it's
uh,
like very monitored and like you have a lot of
it's
help and
very, no,
yeah.
it's very supported, and I
So
think
yeah,
like there is a gradual release of
got
responsibility.
it.
Like I think it's a very TFI term also, but like there's a gradual release of responsibility. So you are under like very good like supervision in that sense, and then you are like four people in one classroom of like 50,
Wow.
60 students, right? Then you basically reduce to three, then you reduce to two, then you reduce to one, and like
Okay.
that's how you get like your individual time of like controlling. So
Fair.
it's all about like, so with children the thing is like they are very curious. They can get like very deep, but like their attention span is also very small. So you have to continuously keep them
Yeah, yeah,
engaged,
yeah.
right? Like, and if you fail to do that, then a
And
lot
what
of
was the age group that got like that you were given?
so it's class plus five. So I taught sixth standard, so 11th and 11 years and 12 years. Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah. That's
Right.
that's a beautiful period to be in because they have just gotten out of primary school,
Right.
right? Like they're the naughtiest ever. But yeah, a lot of fun. I had some lovely kids, like really lovely kids, and I keep following them on Instagram because all of them are like now
Right.
in your pre-university days now. So really cool stuff there.
Is there
Yeah.
any conversation with a student that sort of changed your perspective on life as you knew it? Or, because I mean, my mom's a teacher, and I know a few conversations she sort of shared with me that really changed her perspective on just how she was looking at things or how she was teaching a particular topic.
Yeah, so the thing is like if you stay 2 years with kids, so there are no like there's no one moment, like it's happening every day. Every day kids teach you something, right? Like and that could be like how low your patience level is, or like how low your attention span is. Kids are very honest and brutal in their feedback. Even if they don't say anything, you can see it, right? Like
Yeah.
if they're genuinely not interested, and you have to ignore it. But like you really get like that feedback. But like to remember one, I think for me one conversation that like really I still remember, because I ended up recording that video
Okay.
of my student and posting it on Facebook, is like how underappreciated principals really are in
Mhm.
schools, right? Like and so I had this one student called Uzma, and Uzma basically was participating in a debate competition, and she was very nervous, but she was also very excited and all of that stuff. And staff room, we were just sitting and chatting, and then she said, then I was like, Kajal ma'am, who was the principal, right? Like we started talking about Kajal ma'am, and she said, भैया जब मैं ये सेकंड स्टैंडर्ड में थी तो मेरे को एक बार स्पीच देना था, तो मेरे को ना काजल मैम ने बोला कि तुम एक लाइन बोलोगी, मैं तुमको एक टॉफी दूंगी। तो फिर ऐसे करते करते मैंने पूरी स्पीच बोल डाली, right? And she had like, when she was saying this, there was like a genuine joy, like this person like really held me, sort of a thing. And I don't think Kajal ma'am had any idea that like this is how she
The
has changed.
impact, yeah.
Yeah, right. Like I don't know if she knew about it or not, right? Like, so I think that's when I realized that how there are like so many people around you who are taking very thankless like like opportunities, but like are there, they are showing up every day. So that's one incident that I could remember.
Great. Okay, so from TFI, you moved to the Central Square Foundation, right? What
Yeah.
is the foundation and what really was your role there?
Yeah, so basically, Central Square Foundation is a foundation, started by Ashish Dhawan. He's a very famous like private equity investor. We are an education think and do tank. So we basically work with a lot of not-for-profit sector organizations, specifically in education space, trying to identify how can you sort of like improve the quality of education for the underserved, right? And one of the key things that we now focus there is on the foundational literacy and numeracy. So our entire effort, so we are organized in like different smaller like units. I wouldn't say like verticals because it's like all interconnected. Whenever there is something that's happening which involves like multiple teams to come together, that's how organically that happens. So yeah, we work with the state government, central government, as well as a lot of like not-for-profit education organizations across India, working on how to improve foundational literacy and numeracy, and that's the work that is there right now. Yeah. And the other question was, how did I go there and what was my work?
Yeah, effectively, what kind of projects did you focus on?
Yeah, so basically, I went from data, right? Like I thought like I'll be able to do something like really cool in school, and then that'll be it. Like, so one thing that I did is like I got some students and I asked them, about their best friends. So every student in my class basically came and told their best friends, like this was the first friend, second friend, and third friend, like this tarike se. And then I drew a network graph of it, right? And to basically realize what are the pockets of friendship.
Is this on your portfolio? Like, I would love to see this network.
No, because you can't like really. So this is the project that I was doing with my students, also, right? Like, but what you end up realizing is, I don't think I have the data. Also, like I think I must have deleted it or something. But what I realized is like teachers intuitively know this, right? Like,
yeah, of course.
So this is a solution looking for a problem, right? Like, so then I thought maybe the area where I could use like a lot of my data skills would be like at a higher level of aggregation of data. So instead of looking at it as a classroom and what data it generates, I'll
more
probably
macro in level.
I'll probably like analyze data that comes out of a school or like from a block or a district or a state, something of that sort. And that's what I was looking for. Largely, you get these roles, and so the famous line, famous like role is like monitoring and evaluation. Then you also have like a lot of data focused roles in a lot of not-for-profit and think tanks generally. They basically look at this data. Sometimes it's working with a partner, sometimes you do it in-house, where you would look at like trends and quantitatively like try to assess all of that data. So that's what I was looking for. And Central Square Foundation had this one initiative called Data Initiatives. So that's what I joined. I had really good time, at CSF, because one of the things that we would actively do is like keep like very deep eye in terms of like what the trends are showing. So you not just look at like the data that probably comes out of National Assessment Survey. You also look at USR. You also look at like other surveys. You work with partners to basically see like what is the data like really showing in that sense. So yeah, that was my role. And then internally, then I moved later on to the policy team, where we were sort of working on, sort of like talking about foundational literacy and numeracy with a lot of like partner organizations and the governments. And yeah, like I think like a lot of work that has been done already in India with respect to like just the focus that we need as a country for grade 1 to 3 is now like sort of taken shape, and it's part of the national education policy. It has been called out like one of the like all of our efforts would basically go for waste if we can't ensure that grade 1 to 3 learning can happen. Because if you look at the data, it will show you that if you cannot learn, so right now you could be reading but you could not be understanding, right? Like that's comprehension. So if your children are not able to read and understand, right, like a text and understand, like read a text and understand what the contents of it by grade 5, then the learning trajectory flattens. Then you do not learn anything incrementally, right? And there are both like pedagogical as well as administrative problems to it, reasons to it, not problems. That like in 6th grade the content is at a higher level, So you will always like stay back because you haven't understood, how to read and
So it's a
learn.
loop, and then it's difficult to sort of get out of the
Basically, yeah, then you basically stay on the same path. You are more likely to sort of like fall out of
drop
the
out.
system. Yeah, all of those things happen. So yeah, I got very good opportunity to work at that organization. The other question that you ask is like, what is human level intelligence, right? Like, and for that, there is a very famous example. So I don't know if you have seen this movie called the Imagination Game, which is on the life of Alan Turing. It's an open source mission. It's a mission to advance the state of the art in artificial intelligence for law and justice. Right? Like the initiative is structured is that every organization is coming, advancing their own AI work. Rashika and Smita are sort of leading is Makeathon. It's an 8-week online challenge where we are inviting applicants both from law background and engineering background to create hybrid teams who will work on on AI justice solutions. They're launching the Lawyer Learns AI for Justice move, which again should give you a very good grip on understanding all the parts of the value. And that I was talking to my colleague about is like, what a great time to be alive, right? Like, and that's really the feeling. And I know like some people might call me out like that I'm speaking out of context because there's already a lot of stuff that's happening in the world. But yeah, while that is also true, this is also true. Like what community collaborators and people across the sectors are doing. This is beautiful, right? Like,
Right.
And that sort of a collaboration, openness, cutting across institutes, cutting across like areas of expertise and experience, and just having the will to figure out how do you advance AI for justice is very exciting. And that's why like what a great time to alive. I think that's the feeling that I have, and what I would want everyone to be with, because there are a lot of exciting work that everyone in the ecosystem is doing.